I'd be interested. I'm sure viewers
Mm.
or viewers would be interested in hearing about other big names, other greats in the field that you've encountered. I know you had some
Okay.
contact with
Okay.
Virginia Satir.
When I came to Stanford, I think my second year here, the MRI, Mental Research Institute, was a very active institute. It's not today, it's almost folded. But at that point, it was a very lively institute, not closely associated with Stanford. It was an independent research institute, and they had some very good people there. One of them, well, there was Gregory Bateson, Don Jackson, Paul Watzlawick. One of them was Virginia Satir, and she was one of the real originators of the field of family therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a day a week with her every Friday. I spent the whole day with Virginia and
Really?
the MRI team learning a lot about conjoint family therapy.
Mm-hmm.
She was a lively woman. I thought of her often as a Sherman tank. She drove right over you if you argue with her, but she was creative, a creative lady, and the field of conjoint family therapy was thrived for a long period of time. When I first came to this area, there were a lot of therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists who did nothing but conjoint therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I want to find a conjoint family therapist,
Mm-hmm.
very hard to
Mm-hmm.
find. Same thing as group therapists
Yeah.
practicing privately.
Uh-huh.
But Virginia was a creative mind.
Uh-huh.
Don Jackson was too.
Uh-huh.
Um, so had some contacts with Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl, as you know, wrote quite an amazing book, or a book that emanates from his wartime experience in the camps. He was in a concentration camp, and he feels, and probably may be true, that the thing that kept him alive there was the looking for meaning in this terrible experience. And for him, the meaning was to stay alive, to be able to tell his story. And he managed to stay alive and wrote this book on the meaning of life. A book's a very stirring book, very enthralling book in a way. I called Victor once I went over, I taught at Stanford, Vienna. I taught for 3 months and taught a semester there. And I taught Freud in
Right.
Vienna. That's where I originated my Freud lectures.
I recall, yeah.
Yeah. And so when I was on my way there, I had lost a friend, somebody who had been a chief resident and then a colleague of mine, and he had died of a cancer. And just a couple of days before I left, I had a lesion in my mouth, and the dentist had done a biopsy on. I didn't find out, but I was a heavy smoker in those days, a pipe. So I was worried about that, very anxious. So I got to Vienna, I was anxious, and I thought, well, as long as I'm here, why not get some therapy with Viktor Frankl?
Sure.
So I called him up, and he had just come back from out of town. He agreed to meet me the next day. He knew I told him I was from Stanford. He was very interested in that. But when I got over to Victor's, he was so caught up with telling me his problems, mainly about how he's ignored by the other Viennese therapists, and why isn't he being invited to speak in Vienna, and nobody pays him any attention there, and he feels very discriminated against.
This sounds like an example of self-disclosure that's not taking the patient's interests into account.
Absolutely. In fact, it was quite the contrary. It was by the end of the evening, I realized I hadn't been able to tell him anything about the reason why I came. I never did tell him that. And I met with him a few more times, and
Did he charge you for this?
Oh no, I should have charged him. No, I didn't charge me, and he did extract a promise from me, and I was fine about doing this. I would work on inviting him to come to Stanford. So I invited him to come out to Stanford for a couple of times. He stayed at our home, but he was a difficult man to be with. Berated our au pair, probably someone you remember, I forgot which one it was, for not serving him tea in the best china, because it's Viennese kind of formal background.
One would, I read that in your memoir.
Yeah.
one would think someone who's survived a concentration camp and has
Yeah.
written a book about man's search for meaning would
Yeah.
not be so concerned about whether tea was in China or not.
That's right. But despite these personal flaws, he introduced an important area in the field, and his book has really inspired many people
Yeah.
that way.
Uh-huh. While we're on the topic, any other historical figures?
Well, there's May. There's some time I spent with Carl Rogers.
Really?
Yeah, Carl. He was in Southern California, and he had a group there, the Western Behavioral Science Group. So I went down there a couple times to meet him. Once I spent an afternoon talking with him. A very lovely man. Although he was a pretty heavy user of alcohol, even then, even the early afternoons. But he made a tremendous contribution, which I didn't appreciate at the time, but afterwards I really realized how far ahead of his time he was. Not only with looking at the intimate aspects of what it is that makes therapy work and why a therapist, certain attributes that a therapist has to have, which I think is so well supported, but also that he was very important in the whole T group movement. What was in the East Coast was the T group, sensitivity training group, done in a fairly scientific way. Carl kind of altered that, and in the West Coast, it morphed into something called the Encounter Group. So he was one of the real originators of the Encounter Group here, and led a lot of encounter groups. And so I have nothing but really positive feelings about Rogers. When I got out of the Army, I don't know if you knew this, I came looking for where I would work after that. I was in the Army in Hawaii for 2 years. Every doctor had to go in the Army in those days. So I got interviews at Stanford and at University of California, San Francisco, and at Mendota State Hospital, which is the hospital in Illinois where Carl Rogers was working. So the only reason I wanted to go there was to work with Carl Rogers.
Yeah.
But I got a very good offer from Stanford and just canceled the others. But
well, what do you think are his lasting contributions, Carl Rogers?
Well, I think his lasting contribution is the importance of and the nature of the psychotherapy relationship that we have to try to establish with patients. That's what really changes people, and in some oblique way, that's guided, it's guided my actions a great deal. It's something about our relationship that helps. I wrote a story in my memoir. You may have read this. I know you read an early draft. When I went to Hopkins, one of the first patients that was assigned to me was a patient who was a catatonic schizophrenic. Don't see these anymore. Medication has changed the scene. But in those days, you would see wards in hospital called the statue wards, and people were just motionless all day long. They're catatonic. The medications have eliminated that. But this woman was silent, mute, didn't talk, just sort of frozen face. And that was my patient. And nobody knew how to treat them therapeutically. I saw her every day, saw her for about 20 minutes, and just spoke to her about what I was doing that day, morning papers, anything I could. She wasn't talking to me. She was mute. And I saw her for about 4 months.
Every day.
Every day.
Just talking to
5
her
days a week.
and not getting any response.
Not getting any response.
Very difficult.
Just talking to her. And then one day, I know she suddenly got up from her chair and walked over to me and gave me a big kiss on the lips. And that was it. And of course, I ended the session and went running off to my supervisor. Nobody knew quite how to help her. And then we tried her on experimental medication, one of the new heavy-duty tranquilizers. It was called Pacatal. And she got an amazing response from this. She was back her normal self a few days later. And I talked to her about this, about my visits. I felt for so long I really wasn't being helpful to you. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh no, Dr. Yalom, you are my bread and butter." She somehow some part of her registered that I was coming, paying attention to her, being with her every day, holding in there. So that always reminds me of how important we can be with patients, to be just kind and supportive and be there for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, Carl Rogers is one of my favorite people.
Uh-huh. Any others? Fritz Perls, did you have any contact
I had
with him?
a few contacts. I used to go to some of Fritz Perls's dream seminars down in Esalen.
Uh-huh.
He was an innovative thinker, but I feel like he tended to exploit patients, exploited some of the women around him. Once he came to me and looked deep into my eyes, and he says, "I see a rabbi in there."
Uh-huh.
That's my major encounter with Fritz Perls.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of other people I've forgotten about for the moment.
Uh-huh. I would like to try and just summarize some of the key points we've discussed in these conversations, just for my own mind and perhaps for our viewers. We've talked about, many times in different ways, the importance of the therapeutic relationship, being real, being authentic, being willing to take risks, the importance of relationships in general, interpersonal learning, and how you really developed that concept and found a way to work with that therapeutically in groups, and then took that same concept and really have applied it as one component, but a very powerful component of individual therapy, and how to work in the here and now in individual therapy. And I think that's going to be one of your lasting contributions. In that, distinction between content of what the client is saying, and of course to attend to that very closely, but always to be listening and watching for the process, for what's happening between you and the client, and using that as very powerful data in terms of understanding them and how they are in relationships. I guess key underlying this is the centrality of humans as social beings, and so much of our well-being and mental health, if you want to call that, is our ability to navigate social relationships, and to be successful in that, to have intimate relationships. And that's a big part of what therapy is about. And it seems to me, because of that, despite the advances in medications, despite many different types of techniques of therapy that claim to be able to deal with trauma or deal with other things very quickly, if in fact a big part of what we're working with is helping people to be more successful in their relationships, there's no quick fix for that. And it seems to me therapy is despite gloom and doom predictions by some people, it's not going to go away. But I know that you've had the chance to experiment with and use other forms, doing Skype therapy. What's been your experience with that?
I've had a lot of experience with Skype therapy, and see patients now overseas in my daily practice. I first was introduced to it when I got an inquiry from a woman who was living in a part of the world where there were no other therapist or MD within 500 miles.
Wow.
Very cold Arctic area that she lived in. And so this is a person for whom Skype would seem the only way to work. So I agreed to see it. Very negative about the idea. I mean, very negative about the idea of people I knew who used to do phone therapy, and it just seemed to me to be the last way I want to do therapy in the world when I consider the relationship so important with the patient. But my mind got changed when I worked with this woman in Skype therapy. I was right there in front of her. In fact, I felt I could see more of her than I could back from a chair because her whole face filled the screen, and she, me. And furthermore, she could not have been in the same room with me. I mean, she went there to escape. She was so frightened of people and things that had happened to her. So she wanted to get away. So she wouldn't have been able to come into an office and see me for sure. And even so, though, I felt that we did good interpersonal work with her over a period of several months. And after that, I felt a little differently about seeing people who contacted me for Skype therapy. So I see a number of clients now from every continent. I mean, from all the way Australia and South Africa and England, Turkey, UK right now. So I'll be doing a conference with Iran shortly with a group of therapists, more of a teaching conference. So I make good use of it. I know there's still controversy in the field. There's all kinds of controversies about insurance and what about malpractice insurance? And those things all have to be settled. But my experience as just a technical experience with her, I feel fine about seeing patients. Once in a while, maybe 1 out of 2 or 3 patients will come to the United States at some point and call me and want to have an in-person visit with me, and that's fine. But that's not necessary in my part.
Yeah.
So that's doing Skype therapy. A whole new field of therapy or aspect of therapy has come alive quite recently, and people doing internet therapy. There are a couple of large internet companies here where people call in or write in, and they receive text therapy from the therapist. They're assigned a therapist, and it's very inexpensive. People will get agreement with the therapist. They make their own arrangements, but generally they can contact the therapist once a day or contact the therapist several times a day. The therapist may only contact them once a day. It sounds like the last thing in the world that I'd like to see for therapy. I can't imagine being in internet texting therapy. However, said that, I agreed to supervise one of the leading therapists, senior therapists in this thing. So I supervised her work for quite a while. And I don't know, my opinion is changing a bit. It's not therapy the way I do it or the way you're doing it, but it's something. It is something. People are getting something out of it. They're staying with the therapist. They're benefiting from it. One of them has taken some things the therapist has said in the texting and posted it onto her refrigerator and looks at it when she comes in the room. Some of the clients have commented about the fact that there's a sense, not reality, but there's a sense their therapist is always available to them. For example, if they get a panic in the middle of the night, then they will immediately text their therapist about what they're feeling. Now, the therapist is not going to see them or talk to them or text them then, but they're writing to them then. And so the therapist will then text back when they receive this note.
So in some sense, the therapist is getting some more real-time data of what they're actually feeling, not what they're feeling when they come to the session.
A week later or a day later, sure. So that's something. And so also, in a strange way, there are some patients using internet therapy who are revealing more than they did in their one-to-one because there's a sense of anonymity there. I have had in my supervision several occasions where the patient has said to their texting therapist, I've never said this to anyone else, including my long-term individual therapist, and talked about something that they have a lot of shame about. They don't want people to see their face or whatever. The companies are changing a little bit now. I'd say about this large company, there are about 800 therapists working here. This is really a huge phenomenon. And so 800 therapists. Therapists are texting probably about maybe 40, 50% of the time. They're having video conferencing about a quarter of the time, and a quarter of the time they're leaving phone audio messages back and forth. It's also huge in China. There are several big companies vying for this, and tens of thousands of people on China getting text therapy.
Well, what's encouraging to see is that you're open, continue to be. You've been kind of an experimenter throughout your life, and at the age of 85, you're still learning and open to trying new things. And I know
I'm rippling on through you.
Yeah, yeah. Any final thoughts or words of wisdom you would have for therapists?
No new ones. I just I hope they stay involved in the field. I hope they keep on learning about themselves. I hope they keep on having intimate contact with colleagues and discussing patients. All those things are not anything that should be confined to their training. They should be lifelong practice.
Well, I know that's been the case for me, and you know, I've been privileged to be able to learn from you and to learn more through this conversation. I thank you for that, and my hope is that viewers of this program will have a chance to have learned some more valuable things from you. So thanks for taking the time to do this.
I hope so. Thank you for asking me. Okay, Victor.